It's 2 a.m. and I'm staring at the team's Slack channel again. The little green dot next to Logan's name is on. Of course it is. He and Serafina are hammering out the final details for the Phoenix project launch. I can see the thread, a rapid-fire exchange of code snippets, triumphant gifs, and inside jokes that I'm no longer a part of. My name hasn't been mentioned in that channel for 3 weeks, not since I was quietly, surgically removed from all non-essential project communications. I'm an administrator on the channel. I could add myself back, but I won't. It would be like inviting myself to my own funeral. My finger hovers over the trackpad, scrolling up, past the endless stream of their collaboration, back to the day it all went wrong. Back to that one sentence, that one stupid, toxic, unforgivable sentence I planted in Logan's ear. I'm just worried she's trying to replace you. That's all it took, 9 little words. I refresh the page again. A new message from Logan pops up. At Serafina, you're a lifesaver. Couldn't have done this without you. A little party popper emoji follows. My stomach clenches. It's a physical pain, sharp and acidic. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. That's the sick joke of it all. I was trying to protect what we had. I just wanted to know, really know, that if it came down to it, he would choose me. Is that so wrong? To want to be sure? Why did he have to take it so literally? Why couldn't he just see what I was doing? He chose her, a woman he's known for 6 months, over me, over 5 years of being an unbreakable team. And for the life of me, I still can't fully understand why. Before Serafina, Logan and I were more than just colleagues. We were a unit, a well-oiled, perfectly synchronized machine. I was the chaotic engine of ideas, the one who'd burst into the office on a Monday morning with a dozen half-formed, borderline insane concepts scribbled on a napkin. He was the master engineer, the one who could look at my mess of lines and words, smile and say, "Okay, I see it, let's build it." And he always did. He'd translate my creative chaos into structured, brilliant reality. He was my anchor, my reality check, my biggest cheerleader. Our dynamic was built on an unspoken pact. Us against the corporate machine. We navigated impossible deadlines, insufferable executives, and budget cuts that would have broken any other team. There was a shorthand between us, an entire language spoken in shared glances across a boardroom table. When I proposed the Phoenix project, a complete overhaul of our company's flagship software, everyone else said it was impossible. Too ambitious, too expensive, too risky. But Logan, he just looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face, and said, "When do we start?" He was the definition of loyalty. My loyalty? Then, 6 months ago, Serafina joined our department. She was transferred from the European division, bringing with her a portfolio of impressive projects and an accent that everyone found charming. She was smart, undeniably, and efficient. She had a quiet confidence that wasn't flashy, but it was solid. She didn't grandstand in meetings, but when she spoke, her points were so well-reasoned that people listened. Logan listened. At first, I welcomed it. Another capable mind on the team, great. But then I started noticing little things. The way Logan would laugh at one of her dry jokes. The way they'd get lost in technical debates, their words flying back and forth with an energy that used to be reserved for him and me. They started getting coffee together in the mornings to strategize, a ritual that had always been ours. I know it sounds petty, I know it sounds like a high school drama, but it was more than that. It was a pattern I recognized from my own life, a ghost I thought I'd outrun. The fun, quirky best friend who eventually gets replaced by someone newer, shinier, more suitable. It happened in college. It happened with my first real group of friends after moving to the city. I was always the number two, who was one new arrival away from being forgotten. And as I watched Logan and Serafina, that old, familiar panic began to coil in my gut. Every compliment he paid her, every project task he assigned to her that might have once been mine, felt like a small betrayal. A little shovel digging away at the foundation of what I thought was our fortress. I saw her competence not as an asset, but as a direct, existential threat to my place at his side. The breaking point came during the annual corporate team building retreat. A rustic lodge nestled in a forest of towering pines, promising 2 days of synergy and out-of-the-box thinking. In reality, it was 2 days of forced camaraderie, awkward trust falls, and brainstorming sessions fueled by bad coffee and stale pastries. The air smelled of pine needles and corporate desperation. For me, it was the perfect incubator for my festering anxiety. On the first night, after a full day of pretending to be thrilled by building a raft out of cardboard and duct tape, we were all gathered around a massive bonfire. The company-mandated cheer was starting to fade, replaced by genuine conversations and the crackle of burning logs. And that's when I saw it, the scene that would become seared into my memory. Logan and Serafina were sitting on a log, slightly apart from the main group. A shared laptop was balanced between them. The glow from the screen and the flickering firelight illuminated their faces, making them look intense, intimate. They weren't just chatting, they were in the zone. He'd point at the screen, a line of code highlighted, and she'd nod, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that was almost arrogant. Then she'd say something, and he'd throw his head back and laugh, a deep, genuine laugh that I hadn't heard from him in weeks. They were debugging the very module that had given me headaches for a month, and they were doing it effortlessly, joyfully. It was a perfect, seamless collaboration. It was us, it used to be us. A hot, ugly wave of something that felt like molten lead poured into my stomach. It was happening again. The world was shrinking, and I was being pushed to the edge. In that moment, Serafina wasn't a colleague. She was an invader colonizing the territory that was rightfully mine. The paranoia was no longer a quiet hum in the back of my mind, it was a screaming siren. I couldn't go on wondering. I couldn't spend the rest of this project watching my professional partnership, my most important alliance, get eroded piece by piece. I had to know, I had to pull the fire alarm and see who he'd run to save. I waited, my muscles tense, until Serafina finally closed the laptop with a satisfied snap and got up to grab another s'more. This was my chance. I walked over to Logan, forcing a casual, almost breezy smile. Hey, can I steal you for a sec? We moved a few feet away, into the deep shadows just beyond the fire's main circle of light, where our faces were obscured but we could still feel the heat. I took a deep breath, arranging my features into a mask of grave concern. I even reached out and touched his arm, a gesture of intimacy and urgency. I lowered my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Logan, look, I hate to even bring this up and maybe I'm totally crazy, but I feel like I have to say something. As your friend. He looked at me, his expression open and trusting, the firelight dancing in his eyes. What's up, Danny? You look serious. It's about Serafina, I said, letting the name hang in the air like smoke. I'm just worried. I think she's trying to replace you on Phoenix. It's not just one thing, it's a pattern. Remember that server crash last week? I was in the kitchen getting coffee, and I heard her talking to Director Evans. She was saying that if the backend deployment had been managed with more foresight, it wouldn't have happened. She was basically describing your job, Logan, and framing your work as a failure. I let that sink in, a carefully crafted piece of fiction designed for maximum impact, plausible enough to be believed, poisonous enough to do damage. I just don't want to see you get blindsided. You've poured your heart into this. She just waltzes in and… I trailed off, shaking my head as if in disbelief, letting him fill in the blanks. I watched his face, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and my own deceit. I was waiting for the flash of anger, the protective scowl, the immediate, what? No way. I was waiting for him to turn and look at her with suspicion and then look back at me with renewed alliance. I was waiting for him to say, don't worry, Danny, it's you and me. It's always you and me. That was the whole point. The test was administered. All I had to do was wait for the result, but the result that came was not the one I had so carefully engineered. There was no immediate flash of anger, no defensive posture. Instead, Logan's open, trusting face slowly tightened. He didn't look at Serafina. He kept his eyes locked on mine, and his brow furrowed, not in anger but in deep, unsettling concentration. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the distant laughter from our colleagues. It was a different kind of silence than the comfortable ones we used to share. This one was heavy, analytical. That's a very serious accusation, Danica, he finally said, his voice low and even. He didn't call me Danny, that was the first alarm bell, a very serious thing to say about a team member. My confidence faltered for a second, this wasn't the script. I know, Logan, that's why it was so hard for me to say anything, but I couldn't just sit by and… Where did you hear this? He interrupted, his tone becoming more clinical. You said you were in the kitchen, when was this, what time? I don't know, Tuesday, I think, mid-morning. The lie started to feel thin and scratchy in my throat. I hadn't prepared for an interrogation, I had prepared for an emotional alliance. Okay, he said, nodding slowly, still processing. He wasn't rejecting it, but he wasn't accepting it either. He was treating it like a bug report, a problem to be analyzed and solved. We can't let something like this fester, it's poison for the team, we need to clear the air. My blood ran cold. What do you mean, clear the air? I told you this in confidence. Confidence doesn't solve problems, he said, his voice firming up. It just hides them. If Serafina is undermining the project, we need to address it directly. If she's not, then there's a massive misunderstanding that we need to fix. Either way, this ends tomorrow morning. The next day, my dread materialized in the form of a meeting invitation that appeared in my inbox at 8:05 a.m. Urgent Sync Project Phoenix. Location, Conference Room 3. Attendees, Logan, Serafina, Danica. I walked in to find them already there, sitting on opposite sides of the sterile conference table. Serafina looked confused, maybe a little anxious. Logan sat at the head of the table, his face a grim, unreadable mask. There was no coffee, no pleasantries. He got straight to the point. Thanks for joining, he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. I've called this meeting because Danica brought a serious concern to my attention last night, and I believe in addressing these things head on. He turned his gaze to me, and it felt like a spotlight. Danica, could you please share with Serafina what you told me by the fire? The room fell silent. Serafina's confused expression shifted to one of dawning horror as she looked from Logan to me. My mouth went dry. This was a nightmare. This was a public execution, and I was the one holding the gun, pointed directly at my own head. I stammered, my carefully constructed story crumbling into dust under the harsh fluorescent lights. I just said I was concerned about some of the communication. Logan's patience, a resource I had always considered infinite, snapped. That's not what you said, Danica. You said you heard her telling Director Evans that my work was subpar. You said she was actively trying to take over my role. Is that true, Serafina? He turned to her and Serafina just looked utterly shell-shocked. What? No, Logan, I have never, ever said anything like that. I told Director Evans that your back-end architecture was the most solid I'd ever worked with. I told him you were the reason this project was even viable. Her voice cracked with genuine hurt. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. Danica, why would you say that? All eyes were on me, the air was thick with my lie, there was no escape. Cornered, humiliated, I did the only thing I could do, I confessed. But the words came out twisted, pathetic. It wasn't supposed to be like this, I whispered, the sound pathetic in the silent room. It was a test. I just wanted to see, I needed to know if you still had my back, if you still trusted me more than her. Logan stared at me, the disappointment on his face was a physical blow. It was worse than anger, worse than yelling. It was a quiet, profound sadness. He didn't raise his voice. He just nodded, a single, final gesture of understanding. I see, he said, and his voice was terrifyingly calm. So our friendship, our 5 years of work, our trust, that was all just a game to you. Something you could use as a pawn to test my loyalty. He stood up. I understand now, thank you for clarifying. That was it, he walked out of the room. Serafina, looking like she'd been slapped, gathered her things and followed, refusing to even look at me. It wasn't a shouting match. It was a quiet, clinical amputation. And I was left alone at the table, the ghost of my 9 little words echoing in the silence. The aftermath wasn't a dramatic explosion, it was a slow, creeping frost. Logan didn't go to HR, he didn't have me fired. He did something far more devastating. He enacted a policy of total professional neutrality. He weaponized his disappointment, turning it into an impenetrable wall of courtesy. The first casualty was our morning coffee. I waited by the machine the next day, my heart pounding, rehearsing a new, better apology. He walked in, saw me, and gave a tight, polite nod. Morning, Danica. He poured his coffee and walked out without breaking stride. The ritual was dead, then came the Slack messages. Our private channel, once a chaotic stream of memes, half-baked ideas, and mutual complaints, fell silent. All communication moved to the main project channel, and his messages to me were formal, concise, and always addressed to the group. At Danica, please see the attached report for your review. No more, hey, you got a sec? No more, check out this crazy idea. I had become just another name on a distribution list. In meetings, it was even worse. He would listen to my ideas with a blank, passive expression. He no longer jumped in to build on my points or defend a concept against skeptics. He would just wait until I was finished and say, "Thank you for the input, Danica. Does anyone else have thoughts?" He wasn't disagreeing with me, he was simply refusing to engage. He treated my contributions like line items on an agenda to be acknowledged and moved on from. He surgically removed our synergy from the professional equation, and without it, I realized how much I had relied on him to amplify my own work. The rest of the team picked up on it immediately. They were like a herd of animals sensing a predator in the tall grass. They didn't know the specifics of what happened in that conference room, but they knew the alpha pair had broken. Conversations would stop when I approached the lunch table. I was dropped from email chains that I used to be central to. Serafina, to her credit, was never overtly hostile. She was just distant. She treated me with a wary, pained politeness, like I was a fragile object she was afraid of breaking or a dangerous one she was afraid of provoking. The worst part was the silence. The crushing, deafening silence where our friendship used to be. I would see him across the office, headphones on, completely absorbed in his work, and it felt like looking at a stranger. A stranger who knew all my secrets. The fortress we had built, the us against the world mentality, hadn't just been breached. I had handed the enemy the keys only to discover the enemy was me. He hadn't isolated me. He had simply stepped aside and allowed my own actions to build the walls of my prison. The Phoenix Project was nearing its launch date, a testament to a success I no longer felt a part of. The quiet hum of victory in the office was a constant, grating reminder of my exile. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to try one last time. I waited until I saw him packing up his bag, one of the last people in the office, just like the old days. My hands were slick with sweat as I walked over to his desk. A Logan. He looked up, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of the old Logan, a weariness, not a hostility. Then the polite mask snapped back into place. Danica. What can I do for you? Can we just talk for 5 minutes, please? My voice was thin, desperate. He hesitated, then sighed and slung his bag over his shoulder. The parking garage. Not here. We stood by his car under the buzzing orange lights of the deserted garage. The air was cool and smelled of concrete and exhaust. I had rehearsed this speech 100 times in the shower on my commute, staring at my ceiling at 3 a.m. Logan, I am so sorry, I started, the words tumbling out in a rush. What I did was monstrous. It was paranoid and cruel, and I know that. There's no excuse, but there's a reason. All my life, I've been the person who gets left behind. The third wheel, the one who's great until someone better comes along. When I saw you in Serafina, I panicked. It was like watching a movie I'd seen a dozen times, and I knew how it ended. I did a stupid, horrible thing to try and change the ending. I destroyed our trust because I was terrified of losing it. I know it's broken, but please let me try to fix it. I'll do anything. Tears were streaming down my face. It was a raw, pathetic, but completely honest confession. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, his face unreadable in the dim light. He just stood there, his keys dangling from his hand. When I finally ran out of words, a heavy silence fell between us. I hear you, Danica, he said finally, his voice soft but firm. It was the calmest he'd sounded in weeks, and it terrified me more than any shouting ever could. I forgive you. The relief that washed over me was so intense it almost made my knees buckle. Thank you, I breathed. Oh my God, thank you, Logan. But, he added, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine, I can't let you back into my life. The spark of hope died instantly. I can't, he continued, shaking his head slowly. I can't be friends with someone who sees our relationship as something that needs to be tested. I can't work with a partner who would invent a lie to hurt a colleague just to soothe her own insecurities. I forgive you for being human and for being broken. But I have to protect myself. We can be colleagues, Danica, but we as in us, that's over, it has to be. He unlocked his car, the beep echoing in the empty garage. He got in without another word, started the engine, and drove away, his red tail lights disappearing around the corner. And I was left standing there, alone in the buzzing silence, utterly and completely shattered by the calm, quiet finality of his forgiveness.